The airplane you've loved for 20 years just became a crime scene. This is the truth behind the $180,000 inspection and why your 40-year-old Cessna is now illegal. For decades, the Cessna 182 and 210 were the gold standard of the American sky, rugged, reliable, and built like tanks. But in March 2026, a new set of forensic inspection rules turned these tractors into financial traps. We are not talking about a simple oil change. We are talking about a microscopic search for structural expiration that can cost more than the airplane is worth. There is a hidden guillotine in the latest FAA service letters that is quietly marking thousands of perfectly flying Cessnas for terminal grounding. Why is a tiny, invisible crack suddenly a $180,000 death sentence for your airframe? Is this a move for your safety, or is it the final institutional effort to force every legacy pilot out of the sky forever? A logbook sits open on the workbench, its pages yellowed and soft at the edges, each entry a record of trust between machine and pilot. In the world of the Cessna 182 and Cessna 210, these logbooks are more than paperwork. They are family heirlooms, passed down like a set of tools or a watch. The handwriting inside often belongs to a grandfather, a father, sometimes a daughter. A faded Polaroid taped to the margin shows a child grinning in front of a silver airplane, the same tail number that still flies out of the grass strip at the edge of town. For decades, these airplanes have been the backbone of small airports across America. The numbers tell the story. Nearly 5,000 Cessna 182s and 1,900 Cessna 210s remain on the FAA registry, many of them older than their current owners. Each one is a survivor of recessions, of fuel crises, of the slow disappearance of general aviation from the national conversation. In the hangars of places like 5B6 or 9NC, the local mechanic knows every rivet by touch, every oil stain on the hangar floor. These are not disposable machines. They are the last of the forever airplanes, built with the philosophy that a well-maintained Cessna could outlive its first, second, even third owner. The 1960s marketing reels promised a kind of immortality: thick-gauge aluminum, zinc chromate slathered deep into every seam, wings built to shrug off decades of wind and rain. Pilots called them tractors, simple, sturdy, unsentimental, and always ready for another flight. The average airframe has seen 6,000 to 7,500 hours, some more, patched and polished and sent back into the sky. In the logbooks, you find entries like First Solo, 1978, Brought Home from College, 1986, and Annual Complete, 2020. No findings. These airplanes are woven into the life of small-town America. At more than 500 grass strip airports, the Cessna is the reason for Sunday fly-ins, for $100 hamburger runs, for the kind of community that forms when people gather to watch a friend land, safe again. The airplane is not just a machine, it is the memory of a father's handshake, the pride of a first cross-country, and the quiet promise that this legacy could go on for another generation. But the registry numbers, the logbooks, and the stories now stand in the shadow of something new. A system that looks at these airframes not as living history, but as aging liabilities. The coroner's ledger is filling up, not with crash reports, but with the paperwork of terminal status, inspections, compliance notices, and the threat of economic termination. The forever airplane has become a question mark, waiting for its final entry. A document lands on the workbench with the weight of a verdict. SEL 2026, stamped March 2026, is not a service letter, it's a sentence. The language is precise, clinical. All primary load-carrying structures shall undergo non-destructive evaluation by eddy current method, minimum flaw detectability, 0.125 inches, per NAS 410 technician certification. No more trusting the eye, the flashlight, the mechanic's practice touch. The old rituals, the tap test, the mirror, the borescope, are now relics, swept aside by a new standard that treats every legacy Cessna as a suspect, not a survivor. The mechanic's role has shifted from caretaker to coroner. It is no longer enough to check for corrosion or a hairline crack with a mirror and a pen light. Now, the instrument rules. Eddy current probes, humming with electromagnetic energy, are pressed against bare aluminum, mapping the inner life of a spar. The probe signal, translated into a jagged line on an impedance display, hunts for the signature of an invisible cancer, a microscopic flaw invisible to the human eye that could mean the difference between airworthiness and terminal status. The technician calibrates the unit with a reference block notched to exactly 0.125 inches, the new threshold for structural expiration. Anything the probe finds, no matter how small, is a potential warrant for economic termination. The text of SEL 2026 does not mention the word mortal, but the implication is clear. It invokes NAS 410, and only certified NDT Level 2 or 3 technicians may perform the scan, and every finding must be documented, signed, and archived. This is not a precaution, it is a compliance trap. The mechanic's hands are tied. A finding, even one that would have been dismissed as cosmetic in the past, now triggers a cascade, teardown, reinspection, and if the flaw cannot be blended away, the loss of the airframe. The inspection has become a regulatory executioner, reading out the final clause in the aircraft's logbook. The shift is not just technical, it is existential. Visual checks, once the backbone of annual inspections, are now dismissed as obsolete, their false negatives exposed by accident reports and NTSB case files. In one incident in 2014, a Cessna 182 passed its annual only for a borescope to later reveal a half-inch crack lurking in the wing spar's shadow. The numbers are cold. Visual inspection misses hidden flaws in 1 out of 4 cases, while eddy current sees what the eye cannot, corrosion crawling beneath zinc chromate, fatigue cracks propagating along grain boundaries, silent and unstoppable. The old promise of the forever airplane is undone not by hours flown, but by flaws too small to see and too expensive to ignore. The inspection standard is no longer a shield, it is a guillotine. The mechanic, now forced to speak the language of flaw depth and impedance phase shift, must tell the owner that the only thing standing between their family's airplane and structural expiration is a number on a screen. The logbook, once a chronicle of trust, becomes a record of mortal risk. The cost cascade begins here, with a single clause and a single scan, and it ends with the finality of the grounding. The ledger for a primary structure inspection opens with the cold arithmetic of labor hours. Before a single flaw is found, the process demands a full-body teardown. Every panel, every bolt, every rivet that holds the wing to the fuselage must come off. The first line item is disassembly. For a Cessna 182 or 210, that means stripping the aircraft down to bare aluminum, removing fuel tanks, seats, floors, and the intricate web of control cables and wiring harnesses that have settled into place over decades. Each fastener is catalogued, bagged, and tagged, the order of removal as critical as the order of reassembly. One mistake, and the skin won't fit flush, the holes won't line up, or worse, the structure will flex in ways it never did before. A full teardown for inspection is not a weekend project. The clock starts ticking the moment the first screw is turned. It takes from 150 to 200 hours just to get the wings off, and another 100 to 160 hours to strip the skins and expose the spars and attach points. The labor multiplies with every stubborn bolt, every corroded fitting. Shops charge by the hour, and the rates are not gentle, from $150 to $200 per hour for certified A and P mechanics, and more for NAS 410 NDT technicians. By the time the structure is fully exposed, the ledger shows $45,000, sometimes more, spent before the eddy current probe even hums to life. The inspection itself is forensic. The coroner's checklist reads like a crime scene protocol. Clean the metal, calibrate the probe, scan every critical load path. But before any diagnosis, there is the cost of simply getting to the suspect. The teardown is a kind of ritual dissection, each part removed with a sense of dread that the next layer might reveal the signature of an invisible cancer, a hairline crack, a patch of corrosion, a section where zinc chromate has flaked away to bare, pitted metal. Every hour logged is another entry in the financial autopsy, another step closer to terminal status if the probe finds what the eye cannot. Once the inspection is complete, the process reverses. Reassembly is its own ordeal, 200 hours or more to put the airplane back together. Every piece checked, primed, and torqued to spec. The reassembly bill alone can reach $25,000, and that is if nothing is found, if the structure passes, if every reading is within tolerance. If there is a finding, the ledger explodes. But even in the best-case scenario, the owner faces a $70,000 bill for labor alone, before the first part or paperwork fee is added. The numbers are not abstract. They are the difference between a family airplane returning to the sky and being written off as a financial loss. For many owners, the inspection is not a safety intervention. It is an economic termination, a regulatory execution carried out by line items and labor hours. The machine that once promised forever is now at the mercy of the clock, the probe, and the ledger. A single invoice sits on the bench, heavy as a verdict. The first number, $65,000, belongs to a replacement spar, a part once thought eternal, now priced like a new pickup truck. This is not a gold-plated upgrade. It is a slab of aluminum, drilled and anodized, identical in shape to the spar that has held up the wings for half a century. But the original was born in an era of surplus, when overbuilt meant peace of mind. Today, the same piece arrives with a warning: one flaw, one missed corrosion pit, and the whole cycle starts again. The parts list reads like a ransom note. Rivets, bushings, specialty fasteners, each stamped with a traceable lot number, each required by the new compliance regime. The spar is just the beginning. Add in the cost of certified hardware, the price of zinc chromate primer by the gallon, the shipping surcharges for oversized freight, and the total for materials alone climbs past $80,000. Every item is documented, every serial number logged. There is no room for improvisation. If the paperwork is not perfect, the inspector will not sign. If the inspector will not sign, the airplane cannot fly. Then comes the lab invoice. Non-destructive testing, billed by the hour, performed by a Level 3 technician with a badge and a clipboard. The Eddy Current scan, mandatory, calibrated, and logged, adds another $8,500. The probe is sensitive enough to detect a flaw smaller than a grain of rice. If the impedance trace wobbles, the scan stops and the process escalates. The technician's report is clinical, written in the language of flaw depth and phase shift, each line a potential death warrant for the airframe. There is no appeal. The numbers are the law. Overhead is the silent partner in this autopsy. Shop rates, insurance, compliance audits, the cost of keeping a repair station open under the shadow of liability, all multiplied by the weeks the airplane sits in pieces. The tally for indirect costs climbs as high as the parts themselves. For every hour a mechanic spends on the wing, another hour is spent filling out forms, scanning documents, and uploading evidence to the compliance portal. The final bill is not just a reflection of labor and parts, but of a system that has turned the act of keeping an airplane alive into a bureaucratic siege. The sum, when it arrives on the bottom line, is not a typo: $180,000. That is the price of structural innocence in 2026. The number lands with a thud, impossible to ignore. It is more than the airplane is worth. It is more than most owners have ever spent on a car, a house, or a year of college. The mechanic does not look up. The owner does not speak. There is a silence that lasts 10 seconds, maybe more. In that silence, the promise of the forever airplane dissolves. The verdict is final. The ledger has spoken, and the legacy is terminal. A letter from the insurance company arrives before the next annual. The language is clinical, but the message is unmistakable: no proof of compliance, no coverage. The policy excerpt reads, "Coverage is null and void unless all applicable airworthiness directives and manufacturer's service letters are met." There is no mention of negotiation. For the owner of a 1978 Cessna 182, the renewal quote jumps by 40%, but only if the inspection log matches the latest service letter, not just the FAA Airworthiness Directive. The difference between a recommendation and a requirement collapses under the weight of the single phrase, "Compliance mandatory for continued coverage." At the repair station, the phone rings with the same verdict. Shops refuse annuals for non-compliant airframes, citing exposure to liability and the risk of losing their own insurance. "We cannot sign off without documented proof of NDT inspection," reads the email from a Midwest shop, attaching a copy of the latest service bulletin. The owner is left with no options: comply with the full teardown and forensic scan, or face economic termination by paperwork. The mechanic is no longer a caretaker, but a regulatory executioner, forced to read out the final clause in the aircraft's story. This is not a technical debate. It is a triangle of institutional power, insurers, regulators, and repair stations, each passing the risk, each refusing to blink. The service letter, once a suggestion, becomes a mandate when insurance, liability, and shop policy align. The owner is trapped, not by a crack in the spar, but by the invisible fracture running through the system itself. The logbook, the insurance binder, the repair order all become instruments of structural expiration. The forever airplane is now only as permanent as its paperwork. A mechanic stands at the edge of the hangar, logbook in one hand, salvage invoice in the other. The verdict is final. $180,000 for a forensic inspection on an airplane that, in the open market, might fetch $70,000 on a good day. This is not a negotiation, it is a reckoning. The owner, a grandfather who once taught his granddaughter to taxi between the rows of hangars, faces a choice that feels like a betrayal. The coroner's language is cold but honest. The airframe is terminal, not from metal fatigue alone, but from the economics of compliance. The first step is the 40-60 rule, a hard line drawn where repair costs exceed 60% of the airplane's appraised value. If the inspection quote crosses that threshold, the conversation shifts from repair to salvage. The salvage market is clinical, unsentimental. A parted-out 1978 Cessna 182 might return $25,000 for its engine, $10,000 for avionics, and a few $1,000s for control surfaces and landing gear. The invoice is a mosaic of loss. The sum of its parts never equals the promise of the whole. The owner signs the salvage release, and the logbook closes on a legacy that once seemed untouchable. But some refuse to walk away. Across the country, small groups of owners form coups, pooling resources, buying parts in bulk, and sharing the burden of compliance. They negotiate with shops for group rates, swap labor on weekends, and stretch every dollar to keep one more airplane in the sky. The economics are still brutal, but the community finds agency in solidarity. The coroner explains the options, not with hope, but with the dignity owed to a legacy machine. The final entry in the logbook is not always a loss. Sometimes, it is a choice to fight for one more season of flight. Tonight, the inspection slips aren't safety rituals. They're terminal verdicts. The old promise of the forever airplane does not die from metal fatigue, but from economic termination by regulatory decree. Today, a single signature can erase decades of flying family legacy. The invisible cancer was not always in the wings. It is now in the paperwork. The executioner wears a badge, not coveralls. What's left is a sky with fewer stories and far more silence.